Hello and welcome to EDnews-TV. I am your host, John Ayomide. Today, our topic is one of the most critical and rapidly evolving geopolitical flashpoints in the Western world: the escalating tensions between the United States and Venezuela. In recent months, Washington and Caracas have moved beyond rhetoric into a series of highly charged actions, from sanctions and military deployment to direct seizures of Venezuelan oil shipments at sea. This development have triggered alarm across the regions and on the global stage, raising questions about sovereignty, international law, regional stability, and the prospect for diplomacy. Today, we are honored to be joined by Mr. Matthew Bryza, a former U.S. diplomat. Together, we will unpack what is driving this heightened tension, what the latest development mean for both countries, and what possible pathways lies ahead. Mr. Matthew Bryza, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Just without taking your time, how would you characterize the current state of US-Venezuela relations? Are we witnessing a crisis, a strategic pressure campaign, or something else?
Extreme tension with serious threats from President Trump, the goals of which are not clear. He hasn't, I think, said what he's really trying to do, because he has deployed about 14,000 U.S. military forces, as well as the largest naval fleet and air power ever assembled in the Caribbean Sea by the United States. But it's not enough to invade Venezuela. So I personally interpret all of this show of force to be an attempt to intimidate President of Venezuela, Maduro, to resign and leave Venezuela. But tied into this approach by President Trump is the quest to reduce the flow of drugs to the United States. However, we can talk about that in a moment. Not many drugs go from Venezuela to the United States. And I think he definitely wants to slow the flow of migrants from Venezuela to the United States. But underlying everything is his new National Security Council strategy, or National Security Strategy, which was published a week or so ago, which identifies the top U.S. priority for its own national security being the Western Hemisphere. Trump calls it the corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which held that the United States would not permit any outside countries from outside the Western Hemisphere to be involved in politics and military affairs, and the United States also would not get involved in the internal affairs of countries outside the Western Hemisphere. So President Trump is trying to resurrect the spirit of that Monroe Doctrine, and he's identified the security of the United States, meaning that there not be in power leaders who enable threats to the United States in the Western Hemisphere, like flows of migrants and drugs. And so he's decided that Maduro is one of those leaders who allows those threats against the United States to fester.
Just this question, the second question: is there realistic space for negotiation between U.S. and Maduro's government at this stage, and what kind of diplomatic channels remain open?
It doesn't appear to be a situation where President Trump wants to negotiate from. Early on in the Trump administration, there was an attempt to. And you may recall that an envoy of President Trump, Ambassador Rick Grenell, traveled to Caracas and secured the release of some Americans who had been imprisoned. I understand that since then, there was a big debate, and the policy became under the leadership of Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio, who is a Cuban American and has very strong views that condemn the current government of Cuba and its ally, the government of Venezuela. So the Trump administration seems to have embarked upon a new phase of its previous maximum pressure on the Maduro regime, as it had during the first Trump administration. I think also from Secretary of State Rubio's perspective, the United States did try negotiations with Maduro. There was a deal that the U.S. would ease sanctions and allow U.S. and other oil companies to produce oil in Venezuela if there was a free and fair election in Venezuela. And there was an election. Maduro, by all accounts, lost in a landslide, but then he refused to recognize the results of the election. And so I think Trump would say, well, we tried negotiations and that didn't work.
What impact do sanctions and diplomatic isolations have on ordinary Venezuelans?
Devastating impact, and they already have. So The economic collapse of Venezuela, which means then huge impact on Venezuelans, whether they be rich or poor, is unprecedented in modern history anywhere on Earth. I mean, the speed with which the normal life has collapsed, economic life has collapsed, is unprecedented. So that's led to millions of Venezuelans leaving the country, and then people who were didn't leave the country, their lives are really changed and devastated economically. So it's as is always the case, right? It's the the normal sort of common people that suffer the most from sanctions, and then the ultimate richest, best connected elites, they're fine. Maduro and his inner circle, they're living life like they did before, but they're under, of course, tremendous political stress.
Just the last question without taking your time. What are the most likely scenarios for US Venezuela relations over the next years?
Well, nobody knows. I don't even know if President Trump has decided, but I think in the immediate future, what's most likely is we'll see some U.S. military action taken from the air in bombing. I would guess the infrastructure of the drug cartels that operate in Venezuela. What is not disputed by any analysts who aren't based in Venezuela, whether they be pro-Trump or anti-Trump, is that the Maduro government and his military are intertwined with drug cartels. And to maintain the loyalty of military leaders, President Maduro has allowed his senior military officials to profit enormously, to earn a lot of money from drug trade and from South American drug producers. That's not debated at all in the United States. It's taken as a fact. But what is debated is whether any drugs in significant volumes flow from Venezuela to the United States, and it appears the drugs really go to the Caribbean and then onward to Europe. But needless to say, President Trump now has put himself in a position where he's accused Venezuela of sending drugs to the United States. He's assembled this military force, and so he's going to have to use it, I think, from his perspective. But I think it'll be limited. I think he'll, again, use it against some of the drug cartels' infrastructure, airstrips, factories, and then look for a way to de-escalate. But as long as Maduro's in power, I think tension will remain very, very high between the United States and Venezuela, and Trump will look for ways to persuade Maduro to leave office. And until that happens, we're going to be in a very, very tense situation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matthew. Thank you for sharing your insight and expertise on this complex and evolving situation. Thank you very much for joining us today.